All right, I think we're good now. So welcome everybody. Hopefully more people will be coming in as we continue the evening here. We're just past the hour. I wanted to say, thank you for everybody for joining us, of course. And there was a last minute change to the end of this evening. There's going to be a rabbi by the name of Rabbi Eli Fader who will be giving a quick Devar Torah towards the end of the evening, around 10 minutes to the hour. So I just wanted to give you guys a heads up for that. So please stick around towards the end of the hour to be able to hear Ellie. And Marcy, if you can go ahead and take it from here.
Hello, everyone. And thank you for joining tonight's Aliyah Network lecture series. We will continue the Zoom events every Sunday, same time, same place, 8 p.m. Israel, 1 p.m. New York, and 10 a.m. West Coast. Next week, we'll be delighted to have Yaniv Gabay, who will be discussing the ins and outs on opportunities related to real estate development and projects in Israel. So look out for an invitation to that event. Also, we want to let everyone know to save the date for December 6th, when we are having a super special Aliyah Network lecture. It is going to be the Aliyah Network Inspiration event. We're going to have some really special Olim guests. Can't wait to tell you who they are, but you'll have to stay tuned and look out for an invitation to that as well. And now we're happy to invite Rabbi Pilichowski. Rabbi Uri Pilichowski is an educator. As a teacher, author, and speaker, he teaches Torah and politics, where he specifically emphasizes rational thought and conceptual analysis. He and his family live in Mitzpe Yericho, and the Aliyah Network are happy to hear his perspective on the current U.S. elections and understand how that might impact Jews, Israel, and future Aliyah. Uri?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Marcy. Thank you, Marcy and David, for having me. And the Aliyah Network. This is an exciting new project that we are all really enthused about, and look forward to its blessing and the influence that it's going to have, and hopefully populate the country. You guys are doing great work, and but there are those that aren't able to do the work that you're doing, so we rely on you. So thank you very, very much. We are truly, truly excited about the prospects of what you're going to assuredly accomplish over the next couple of years. So thank you for having me. What I'd like to do tonight is tonight here in Israel is discuss the effects of the election. The election that might be over, might not be over, might go on forever, it seems. And what effect it'll have on us here in Israel, across the world. And then lastly, tie it into Aliyah, because that's why we're all here, and see how that affects our prospects for Aliyah, for the Jewish people, and what it means. So the first thing I want to do is I want to put a disclaimer out there. I am fully no one knows my own political views, but I am, including my wife. I do that to make sure that my students don't get a sense of it. I am pro-Israel, I'll tell you that. And by the fact that I live in Judea and Samaria and Yehuda v'Shomron, so I am pro-settlement. That's a giveaway. But at the same time, whether I'm a Republican or a Democrat, it doesn't matter who I supported in this election. Nobody knows that. I worked with both campaigns. But the facts are that according to the count as it stands now, Vice President Joe Biden will be the next president of the United States. That might be overturned. That's fully possible. It doesn't look likely, but it doesn't. So for the course of this conversation, I'm going to assume that the Biden-Harris administration will be the next administration. If it turns out I'm wrong, then this discussion was purely academic, and we'll never know what might have happened. But if President Trump and his lawyers are successful and they're able to, for the first time ever, overturn an entire United States election, that'll be a remarkable point in history, and a sad note for the United States that there was that much corruption in their elections. But let's assume, for the time being, that we're going to have a Biden-Harris administration, and discuss what that is, what that's going to mean. I'm not somebody that really cares so much about a person's motivations when they reach political office. Why somebody likes Israel, why they don't like Israel, whether they like Israel or whether they don't like Israel doesn't matter to me so much. What matters to me is what we can expect from them and what we can encourage them to do. So going forward, there are really a couple of issues that we'll be concerned with when it comes to the next administration. Number one, chief among them, and this is something that I always tell my students, is what is the number one concern for Israel, and what's the number two concern, and what's the number three concern? And the answer to that is Iran, Iran, and Iran. Everything else, no matter how much it makes the headlines and no matter how much people like talking about it, doesn't even come close. For the very simple reason that Iran is the only country or enemy or institution at this point that can face an existential threat to the state of Israel. If Egypt and Jordan and Syria and Lebanon and Hezbollah and Hamas all decided one day that they were going to try to wipe Israel off the map and staged a simultaneous war against us, it would end in a couple of hours. And we would win. And that would be the end of all of those, which is why for the last 30 odd years, they haven't tried that, because there's absolutely no reason for them to try. They will guarantee they will lose that battle. If Iran develops a nuclear weapon, and they are able to use that nuclear weapon, that would prove an existential threat to the state of Israel and could end Israel within a matter of 30 minutes. That would be the end of Israel. So that is a serious threat and something that we must be concerned about. That has to be the number one, the number two, and the number three concern that we have about Iran. The number one threat of a nuclear weapon that Iran poses is obviously using a nuclear weapon. We are not a large country. If a nuclear weapon was detonated inside of Israel, that would be essentially the end of Israel as we know it. So we have to make sure that Iran does not possess a nuclear weapon so that they don't get to use the nuclear weapon. But there are other threats to Iran having a nuclear weapon other than them using it. Let me paint and I'm sorry if this is going to sound somewhat worrying and terrifying, but at the end, we'll show why we don't really have that much to worry about. The second thing that Iran could do with a nuclear weapon that would also be scary is what we call political blackmail, which is they have two proxies in the region, Hezbollah and Hamas, that we know about, that are directly funded by Iran. And what Iran can simply do, a nuclear powered Iran, is order them to fire their rockets. Hezbollah today has somewhere between 100 and 200,000 rockets facing Israel, and it's no longer rockets that can, quote unquote, only hit the Galil. These rockets can reach everywhere in Israel at this point with pinpoint accuracy. So they could take out the runways at Ben Gurion, the refineries in Haifa. They could take out the Knesset in Jerusalem. And these are real serious threats. Hamas at the same time also has rockets that could reach Israel. So if Iran would order Hezbollah and Hamas to simultaneously fire their rockets, and then they would announce to Israel that any retaliation on Israel's point would be seen as an attack on the innocent people of southern Lebanon and the innocent people of Gaza, and Iran would feel the need to respond in a nuclear fashion, then Israel and any Israeli prime minister would be faced with the choice of whether or not to call Iran's bluff. And they would have to see, should they retaliate or should they hold back? That's a scary situation. If you're the Israeli prime minister, you either have two choices: see if Iran is serious about their nuclear capabilities and whether they'll use a nuclear weapon, or allow yourself to have a carte blanche attack from rockets, which, if you remember from the mid-2000s, when Hezbollah was firing rockets from Lebanon, the entire north of Israel, 300,000 people moved out of their homes and came down into Israel. Whoever had relatives or could afford a hotel room moved out of the north. If there is no place to go, and everywhere you go is under the threat of rocket attack, that's essentially the end of Israel on a functional level. So that would be the second type of threat that Iran would face with a nuclear weapon. The third, which to me is the scariest because it's likely of what they would do if they had a nuclear weapon, is simply hand a nuclear weapon off to Hezbollah, to Hamas, to some unknown.
Why can't I hear?
I'm sorry, I accidentally was muted. I apologize. So the third threat that we would face would be if Iran handed its nuclear weapon over to Hezbollah, over to Hamas, or to some jihadist terrorist organization that has no qualms of using a nuclear weapon in Israel and no.
Okay, we're gonna go. Why do they keep? What happened?
Okay. So you'd have to worry about Iran handing that nuclear weapon over to some terrorist organization that would then use it in Israeli city as a dirty bomb, and that would be again the end of Israel as we know it. So those are the three threats that nuclear Iran faces. This has been known, and it's really and thanks to Bibi Netanyahu, who when he was sort of not unknown because he had been prime minister beforehand, but in the late 2000s, 2008, 2009, actually even a little earlier, he alerted the world while the world was worried about Hezbollah and the world was worried about Hamas. He started talking about Iran, incessantly talking about Iran. And everybody thought that he was crazy and he was trying to find his niche. And he said, stop looking at Iraq, stop looking everywhere else. Where we have to look is Iran. And thankfully, he did a very good job, brought it to the attention. The Bush administration wasn't paying attention to it at all. And the Obama administration, to its credit, in the beginning of the Obama administration, really hatched up sanctions on Iran to the point where, along with certain senators, put sanctions on Iran, which destroyed their economy to the point, I don't know if you remember watching this, but Iran forbade showing chicken on television in shows because people couldn't afford chicken and it would remind them of what they were missing. So that's how bad the economy in Iran was, and it brought them to their knees to the point where they came to the Obama administration and said, okay, we're here. What do you need us to do in order to get these killer sanctions off of us? And that turned into the Iran nuclear deal, where Iran realized that they were probably better negotiators than the Obama administration and came out with the P51 JCPOA, which is what we call the Iran deal, which again, most of us, I assume here, were not happy with the Iran deal and stood against it. That was a good portion of my life back then, was fighting in Washington, even though I was for part of it I was there, part of it I was here. But fighting against the Iran deal was a battle that the pro-Israel community lost. We lost that battle, and the Iran deal was signed. But the Iran deal, as much as it could have helped, and an Iran deal could have helped, it didn't help enough. And it didn't help enough because it didn't have enough inspections. The inspection regime wasn't strong enough. Iran was able to go ahead and somewhat develop its nuclear program after 15 years, what they call the sunset clause, which allowed it after a number of years to go back. The inspection regime itself wasn't strong enough. Iran had a 28-day heads up before the inspectors would come. So the inspectors would have to send a letter to Iran and say, we'd like to inspect this place because we've heard you're developing nuclear weapons in this area. And then Iran would have 28 days to allow them in. So what do you do in those 28 days? Obviously, you clean up. So it was looked upon as weak. But most of all, and this should have been our real concern, besides the nuclear concerns, which were obvious to everybody, there are a number, and I don't want to get too technical, but to deliver a nuclear weapon, you need the nuclear material, you need the nuclear know-how, but you also need a way of delivering it. You need a way to get it from point A to point B. North Korea has nuclear weapons, but they can't get them anywhere. Every time they fire one of their missiles at America to show that they can get it somewhere close, they miss by 500 miles. It's a joke. They're laughed at every time they try this because it's not so easy to develop an intercontinental ballistic missile. Most of us have never even heard of it, let alone the technology to deliver it. Iran doesn't have an intercontinental ballistic missile. So if they developed a nuclear weapon, they wouldn't be able to get it to Israel unless they put it on a truck and drove it across Iraq and Jordan and hope nobody would notice it in the meantime. But they're pretty big. So that's not going to, when you come to Israel, you try to sneak in your Heinz ketchup and everything else that you're bringing in. Imagine trying to get a nuclear weapon across a border. It's not simple. So that would be an issue that we have to be careful of. The nuclear deal literally just asked Iran not to develop ballistic missiles. It didn't say it wasn't allowed. It really says that the international community, this is the line, requests of the Iranian regime not to develop ballistic missiles. Oddly enough, they ignored that. If you remember the ballistic missiles that they would fire with Hebrew written on the side, right, with a Magen David that it was aimed at, those were the ballistic missiles that we're talking about. And lastly, their sponsor of terror. Their sponsor of terror is a serious problem because they're paying for Hezbollah. They're paying for some of Hamas, what Qatar is not picking up the tab on. If you ask where do they get the money for this, we have sanctions. So the answer is the Obama administration delivered $1.7 billion in cash. I don't know if you've ever had a lot of cash with you at any point. I imagine none of us have had $1 million in cash in front of them. $1.7 billion in cash requires 3 737 airplanes to bring over without the seats in them. Okay, so that's just piles, and there's video. You can Google the video of the planes landing with cash. It's an incredible sight. 3 different types of currencies. It was very well done by Iran and the Obama administration. Countries don't use cash. The United States of America doesn't use cash, right? They don't have cash. Countries only use cash when they have to give it to terrorist organizations and hide it. So that's where this cash was clearly going. Everybody knew it was going there. There was no other reason why Iran would need this type of currency, and the amounts of currency is ridiculous. So it's clearly to ship it off to Hezbollah, to use it to buy missiles and pay off its fighters, which it then used in Syria. Okay. So that's the problem of the nuclear weapons, and then that's the problem of terrorism that we have to worry about with Iran. We've got to stop Iran. Okay, let's put it that way. Iran must be. The people of Iran are wonderful. I have friends in Tehran. They are wonderful people. The country is 40% young people who would like nothing else but to have the freedom that Americans and Israelis enjoy. They like to be friends with Israelis. They are not fanatics. The people of Iran. Their leadership are fanatical. Their leadership are people that are by any shape and measurement crazy. They're not religious people that have a different viewpoint of us on the world. This isn't like us and the Pope, where we have differences in theology. These are people that are certifiable crazy in any other society. We would not allow them to walk the streets. We would say that these people have issues. So that's Iran's regime has to go. How that happens is a very good question. America is not in the business anymore of regime change. This might be a time to get back into the business, but they're not. Right now, they're not. As we speak together, Elliot Abrams, who's the Trump administration official in charge of Iran, is meeting with Bibi Netanyahu. And although Elliot Abrams is in favor of regime change, I can promise you that's not the option that he's discussing right now with Bibi Netanyahu. They're discussing further sanctions, how to stop Iran in other ways, more clandestine type of ways. So what can we expect from the Biden administration? That's the important question. How do we see them stopping Iran? And the Biden administration is committed to getting back into the Iran deal. But Vice President Biden has said that he recognizes the weaknesses in the Iran deal and would like to renegotiate it, which is positive. That's very good to hear that. How he goes about doing that and how he convinces Iran to do that, I think the Trump administration has set it up perfectly for him. The Trump administration has increased sanctions to the point where Iran, the average Iranian, is once again suffering. That's not something that we want, but that's a metric at least of how effective the sanctions are. So that's what's happening now. So the Biden administration can simply come in and say, listen, we didn't give you these sanctions, but if you want them to be relieved in any way, shape, or form, then let's renegotiate the Iran deal and let's tweak some things that are problematic. I hope that's what's going to happen. It's impossible to be an advocate of not having a deal with Iran. Nobody felt that way. President Trump didn't feel that way. Everybody recognizes that there's only 2 options here, which is either going full force regime change, which nobody's going to do, or creating a new deal with Iran that's in our favor. I hope we can somehow work with the Biden administration to make sure that any new terms of the Iran deal are something that we can not only live with, but be very comfortable with. That's what I hope. And we'll see what happens. That's what we're going to have to see. That's where lobbying comes in. And that's where we have to hope that our leaders are effective and strong enough. And we don't have this sort of animosity, which we'll talk about, that we used to have with the Obama administration in the new administration. Okay, that's where I'm going to stop with Iran. So if anybody wants to ask questions on Iran, now would be the time. You could also ask afterwards, but this would be the time right about now. Okay, I'll assume nobody does, or that you're on mute and you can't get your mute off. Okay, so going forward, the next issue is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. We, for those of us that live here, know we have an Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I live a 5-10 minute drive away from Yericho, from Jericho, with 23,000 Palestinians that live there under their own control. And I can't go into Jericho. That's a problem. I'm not allowed to as an Israeli citizen. It is way too dangerous for me to go in. Today, there was an attempted stabbing attack by south of Hebron. There are 3 attempted attacks every single day. We don't even hear about them because they don't even make the news anymore. Planned attacks. Most of them are stopped, thankfully. And most of them are stopped so early that we don't even hear about them. And that's how safe life has become here. But the conflict is real, even though we're safe and the average person living here doesn't feel the conflict. There still is a conflict that we would like to have resolved. Everybody would like to have this conflict resolved. Of course, there are 450,000 Jews that live in Yehuda v'Shomron and Judea and Samaria, which means that there are no less than 700,000 ideas of how to solve the conflict. And none of them seem to make any more sense than the other. We almost had what was called sovereignty, an extension of sovereignty. Annexation is the wrong term. It wouldn't make any sense to use it, even though it was used by the media a lot. But we almost had an extension of sovereignty. That didn't happen. So where does the Israeli-Palestinian conflict go from here? So first of all, the Trump administration took a very novel approach in many different ways to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But one of the ways that made the biggest headlines was they essentially cut the Palestinians off. They said to the Palestinians, look, here's the deal. You can take our ideas and work with us. You don't have to accept them, but work with us on them. And then we'll give you $50 billion in investment and your own state. You'll also lose 30% of your land. You don't have to accept this, but you do have to come to the table. The Palestinians said, we'll wait to the next election, which turned out to be a good idea on their part in the meantime, because President Trump lost without a court case overturning it. But it seems that way. It seems like this could have been a good strategy on their part of waiting it out. The Trump administration, they didn't just cut off talks with the Palestinians, which was actually the Palestinians' decision, but they decided to cut off all aid to the Palestinian Authority. Now, truth be told, Congress passed no less than 4 laws over the last 3 years, which ensured that there would be no aid going to the Palestinian Authority. The Palestinian Authority is never going to see another cent from the United States until they decide to end what's called pay for slay, which they can't do because then they'd be cutting off payments to terrorists, and you can only imagine what terrorists do in retaliation for having their payments cut off. They don't strike. So that's a problem. But even if not, the Palestinian Authority, what most people don't realize is they themselves opted out of getting foreign aid from America. A law was passed 2 years ago that says that if the Palestinian Authority wants to take money from America, they also have to accept liability for lawsuits in American courts. The Palestinian Authority is very smart and realized that every single American terror victim that retains American citizenship will sue for a lot more money than the $400 million that America was providing the Palestinian Authority. So they quickly themselves said, we don't want any more aid. Thank you very much. The Biden administration has said that they will find a way to return that aid. They're not talking about the Palestinian Authority aid. What they're talking about is something else that the Trump administration cut off, which was funds for Palestinian NGOs. And we're referring to are hospitals and organizations that do somewhat good work. This is not money that's funneled to terrorism, as we like to say it. It's not true. The reasoning behind the Trump administration was twofold. One, you're not playing ball with us, so we're not going to start spending money on you, no matter how bad you need it. And number two is, if you claim poverty and that you need this money, how do you have the money of $400 million a year to pay terrorists? We don't understand that. So you can't claim on the one hand poverty, on the other hand that you have enough money for pay for slay. So cut out pay for slay. And then if you still need money, come back to us. The Palestinians didn't actually lose any money on this. The Europeans picked up the Americans' lack of funding, and the Palestinians. That's why you don't have Palestinian hospital patients dying at higher rates than they ever did before, because they have enough funding. Okay. The Biden administration, one other thing the Trump administration did was the PLO used to have an office in Washington, D.C. That's only at the behest of the American government. The Trump administration told them, close it, you're out of here, go back to the West Bank. So the Biden administration, and one last thing, sorry, there's a consulate that became a branch of the embassy in Jerusalem that used to service only Palestinian Arabs, and the Trump administration made that part of the embassy. The Biden administration has said that they're going to reinstate all three of those things: the embassy that we just talked about to the Palestinians, which is really a consulate, the funding to the NGOs, and the PLO office in Washington, D.C. This will get us furious. We will be angry and screaming and look at them. They're so horrible. They did everything, and it doesn't matter. I'm telling you, it's all cosmetic. Yes, it makes somewhat of a difference, and we should favor, at least in my opinion, the Trump approach to it. But this is merely going to be cosmetic. That's not going to be our issue that we're going to have to fight for with the Biden administration. What we're going to have to worry about is whether or not and this is especially connected to Aliyah, is how much the Biden administration allows us to build. And what I mean by that is, really, we should tell the United States of America, you have no right to tell us what we can build and what we can't build. And while we would like for that to be true, that's not really true. We have to go to the American administration every time we want to build somewhere and say, are you going to get angry at us before? This is true of the Trump administration. It's true of the Obama administration. It was true of the Bush administration. And as you go backwards, every single one of them, we have to get permission from the American administration and literally present our plans to them for approval. That's the handcuffs that we have, that we get from our relationship with America. You can make your own judgment call if it's worth it or not. I think it is, but that's up to you. The Biden administration, we're going to have to see how much do they actually say no. The Obama administration opened up and said not one brick, and we didn't have one brick for a long time. Not one brick was a very serious thing. It was a building freeze. So the question that we're going to have to ask, and we're going to have to wait and see, is the Biden administration going to put teeth into their threats and say, hey, really, no building. We really can't, no, we're not going to allow you any more building. Or are they just going to, every single time we have a building project, come out and say, we condemn the building project, we think it's a bad idea, it's an impediment to peace with the Palestinians, and it takes this two-state solution further away from reality, and then we say, thank you, we're so sorry, but we're going to keep building. That's what I hope. So that's I'm a big fan of building. So that's what we see that we're going to have in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The Biden administration, people are worried, are in favor of a two-state solution. That is true. They're also realists and know that there's no chance there's going to be a two-state solution anytime soon. Nobody thinks that there's any chance of establishing a Palestinian state in the next couple of decades. There just isn't. There's no way it can happen culturally. They're not equipped to have a state. It just can't happen. So nobody has to worry about that. The question just is the ramifications of keeping the two-state solution idea alive. That's the question that we have to ask ourselves, where that's going to come in. We're going to have to see if the Biden administration will refund UNRWA. UNRWA is the United Nations Relief Works organization that deals with what they call Palestinian refugees, which is about 8 million people around the world, and still telling them that they have a right of return, not to the West Bank, not to Judea and Samaria, but to places like Jaffa and Tel Aviv, where their great-grandparents lived once upon a time, and now they demand to come back. The Trump administration cut off funding to UNRWA, and that they had to cut their budget at 30%. That was made up by other places. So that's a question. Okay. Lastly, the last.
I hear you.
Yeah, I'm sorry? No? Okay. The last issue that I want to address is most fundamental
I hear you.
is the U.S.-Israel relationship. Is the U.S.-Israel relationship, it will adversely be affected, will be positively affected There has never been a time where the United States and Israel have worked as closely together as in the Trump administration. I'm not saying that means that Donald Trump was the greatest president. I'm not saying that means you should have voted for him. I'm not saying that means that we hope that he wins in the next. I'm not saying anything. I'm just saying that if you understand support of Israel as when Israel asks for something, the United States provides it. So there's never been a time where we've had as supportive of a president. That's it. I'm not making judgment calls on whether that was good for Israel or not. I'm just stating facts. There has never been a president that has answered the call with a yes more than President Trump. Put it that way. Okay. Whether that yes was a good idea, bad idea, that's for you, for your own opinion to have. That's a very warm relationship when the prime minister can rely and know that the president is going to back him up. At the United Nations, it was incredible. What people don't realize, because the Obama administration ruined it at the last minute, but the Obama administration, before that last vote at the UN where they abstained, the Obama administration had a perfect record of supporting Israel at the UN. They had a perfect voting record until that last vote where they abstained. But the United States never voted against Israel at the United Nations, which is not true of any other administration. Every other American administration voted against Israel at the United Nations. So everybody always says that the Obama administration is the worst because they abstained on that last. There were administrations that we consider very pro-Israel that voted against Israel on those same issues. So that being said, I can imagine that the Biden administration will also support Israel at the United Nations because there's no reason to think otherwise. But how much will Israel be able to rely on a Biden administration? How warm will that relationship be? How special will it be? Will we have a contentious relationship like we had because the personalities clashed so much between Bibi Netanyahu and Barack Obama? I don't think we'll have that again. If you know Vice President Biden, and I really do suggest this, if you want to be an informed person, read Joe Biden's last book about losing his son. And you will understand the man's personality more than anything else. He is run completely on empathy. That he is the most empathetic person and my wife is a hospice chaplain. Okay, so my wife excels at empathy, but you will read this book and there wasn't a page that I had that is not stained by tears. It is an incredible, incredible book that tells you, and it shows you how much he cares for other people. That type of a personality doesn't simply sit there and act tough and rough with your friends. He is famous for getting into disagreements with Israel. The way I understand Vice President Biden from the decade and a half that I've been following him and looking back at his past way before we got to this point, if you watch all of his speeches to organizations, you watch his speech to J Street, the full speech, not the minute and a half clip where they spiced out to find all the anti-Israel stuff that he said. But if you look at the full speech to J Street and then compare it to his full speech to AIPAC this past year, and then play it again, but keep your eyes closed. Don't look at who he's speaking to. The J Street speech sounds like he's speaking to AIPAC, and the AIPAC speech sounds like he's speaking to J Street. And the reason why he does this is because it's a personality quirk of his. He loves telling people what they don't like to hear. And he often prefaces his speech with, I know you're not going to want to hear this, but I'm going to tell you anyway because that's what friends do. He's very blunt, and not as blunt as President Trump, but he's very open and honest. And that's how he likes to be. So you're going to see a lot of very public, contentious type of disagreements, but it won't be the same. Bibi Netanyahu will feel perfectly comfortable picking up the phone and calling him, and Joe Biden will feel perfectly comfortable calling up Bibi Netanyahu and giving him a piece of his mind. But them at the end of the day hugging and kissing, and that'll be the end of the fight. They will get up. They will make up before every single disagreement. So that's what I would say. I'd say that's what we have to look forward to in this next administration. Many of you might not have been happy with the results. Many of you would have are praying hard that the court cases work out for President Trump. And if it does, then it'll make for a number of very interesting weeks. If not, then we're going to have to work very hard to make sure that the Biden administration understands what Israel needs. And that'll be up to all of us to constantly contact our members of Congress. We're all Americans. Those that live in America, those that live in Israel still have members of Congress that represent them, and you can call them. But let's bring this to one last theme before I take questions, which is Aliyah. I made Aliyah 6 years ago from Boca Raton, Florida. Before that, I lived in Beverly Hills, California, and I was raised in Fair Lawn, New Jersey, and born in Brooklyn, New York. So I've had my gamut of all across the United States, and I've seen it. The United States is a wonderful place. It is a safe place for Jews. It is a perfect place to live, except for one thing. It's just not home. It might feel like home. It might feel like it's your place. You might feel very comfortable there. You might know all the places, and you might be able to find the kosher food and your synagogue, and it might be very, very comfortable. But this is home. This is home. And everybody ends up at one point or another having to come home. The question is, do you come home on your own terms, and you get to set the terms of your coming home and get to choose how you're going to come home and what bedroom you get to live in and where you get to stay? Or do you wait until somebody else determines how things happen? You have a wonderful opportunity. And when I say you, I say everybody that lives in America right now. Right now, you have a choice. You have a choice to move to Israel. You have that choice. And I can't tell you, everybody has their own peklach, and everybody has their own situation. Everybody has their own deal. But right now, you have the ability to start at least making plans. And what's so great about something like the Aliyah Network is that you can start planning and make it a plan. And as you start doing that, you'll become more and more comfortable with the idea of Aliyah, start hearing the logistics and seeing how something that seems very complicated and very difficult and very challenging isn't actually as challenging as it might sound. There's only a couple things you really have to choose. Where do you want to live? What kind of house you want to have? What kind of community you want to live in? And when you want to come, and figuring out a way to make a living, which is much, I find everybody always says, you got to have 4 or 5 jobs when you come to Israel to make a living. I had 4 or 5 jobs in America. It's not like making a living is simple anywhere. You find me the place that is easy to make a living in, and that's a great place for everybody who will want to live there, right? That's so it's the difference is that it's comfortable. We're used to things in America. And moving across the world is a challenge. It's very difficult. No one's saying it's easy, but it is home. And here you have a network, a literal network. It's called a network, where you have the ability to reach out to David and to Marcy and to all the people in this network and be able to say, okay, listen, I'm years away from this, but let's just start the conversation. And what should be the first things that I'm going to think about? What are the first things that I want to talk about? With the political situation the way it is and the divisiveness in America, I don't think Jews have to worry about anything happening to them in America, but the divisiveness and the nastiness that goes on, it's not, from what I see in the amount of shuls that have to put up signs that say, let's not talk politics this Shabbos. In Israel, everybody talks politics, and we all yell at each other and scream at each other, but we're best friends afterwards. There's nobody that's in a fight because you voted for Bayit Yehudi and you voted for Likud. We all love each other. We all get it. We all understand that we're going to have political differences, and there's no divisiveness in this country. You got 10,000 people that like marching every Saturday night because that's something to do during a time of Corona, right? But other than those 10,000 people, and they all get along, they're all having fun. There's no violence. They're just marching up and down, honking their horns and waving their signs, but there's no violence. Nobody's having any trouble. That's not true in America. So come here. This is a great place to be. Home is always special. So I'll tell you, I'll end with one last story, and then you can fire away your questions and tell me why I was wrong on all my analysis and my viewpoints. When we moved to Israel, we moved into Israel in 2014 in the summer in the middle of Operation Cast Lead. So we moved in Soketan, and we moved in the middle, and we were not planning on moving in the middle of a war. We didn't wait for war to break out and then say this is where we should move, and this is the time that we should move. But we decided to move then, and we were the only Nefesh B'Nefesh flight that didn't have a ceremony because they had to rush us out of the airport before the next rocket fell. And we, for a number of reasons, we were known in the media, so we were an easy interview. And while our lift was being packed and the moving men are moving in the background with the boxes, there's a Miami television station sitting in our dining room interviewing us. And he asked me a very interesting question. And it comes back to what I said in the beginning. He said, "Why are you moving in the middle of a war?" He said, "I understand you want to move to Israel, but just wait. Why are you moving in the middle of a war?" And I said, "I'm going home, and home is always the safest place. And that's why we're going. So come on home. This is where we want you to be. And this is where you'll be welcomed with open arms and you'll always be safest." Okay, David and Marcy, thank you so much for having me. And if anybody has any questions they want to fire away, go ahead. Tell me why I'm wrong.
Absolutely. First of all, before you even take any questions, guys, definitely, if you have any questions, now's the time. You know, it's a political talk. We have a real professional here, so to speak, who knows this topic very well. So please, guys, if you have any questions for Rabbi Pilichowski, now's the time. Let's see if we have anybody who comes in on the chat. Nobody?
Wow, it's amazing. I must have spoken.
I know.
This is incredible.
Okay. All right. Well, let me ask you this. I mean, you know, there are a lot of people that have a perception. I know you said in America today, it's not really like a necessarily dangerous situation for Jews at large. Do you see a trend, at least that or not least, a trend that seems to be trending towards a more of a perilous sort of situation for Jews around the country? Or is that really just a perception that people have that's not necessarily based in hard facts and reality?
I think there's some danger. I'm not an expert, and I'm definitely not on the ground. But I think that there is some danger. You see more attacks. I mean, you definitely see more attacks. You see, you see the general tone across the board in all issues is much more divisive and much more violent. So that's going to translate and manifest itself in every area. Jews, non-Jews, everybody. So if before, when you walked to synagogue, somebody screamed out a pejorative term for Jews at you, maybe now it's an egg or a rock, as people taking it to the next level. So that's what I'd see. I don't think we're talking about a state-sponsored type of anti-Semitism. We're anywhere near that. But I think that you do see it could get more dangerous just because the tone is being ratcheted up so much. That is something that I'm somewhat concerned about.
Thank you for that. We do have a question coming in from Nancy Stanfield over here. She says, "What part will the Arab coalition in the U.S. play in all this? How effective will they be? How much pull do you think they have?"
So it's interesting. So it's not so much the Arab. I understand why we call it the Arab contingent in America. A lot of them happen to be Arabs, but it's much broader than that. It's really the progressive movement. And the progressive movement plays something called identity politics, where you must identify with us on all issues across the board. And that's led by the Squad, by AOC, and really certain parts of their you have your Bernie Sanders perspective, and you have different parts of these people they're very loud, but that's what they are. They're loud. People say the whole Democratic Party is turning anti-Israel. Read the Democratic platform. It's not turning anti-Israel. Those voices were very much silent. They put up a huge fight to try to get their viewpoints in the Democratic Party platform, and they were shut down decisively. Joe Biden himself read what they wanted, and he said, "No, this is not who we are as a party. This is not," and it's not that this is old school and the whole new young wing of it. That's not true either. What's really good, what's really positive about this is that there's a man that was just elected to Congress as progressive as AOC. In fact, he's the district next to AOC. His name is Richie Torres. Google Richie Torres. And he is as progressive on every single issue. He's an African-American gay man, progressive in Queens, New York. I mean, this is like check down the box, everything until you get to Israel. He's just as pro-Israel as I am. He is incredible and he's progressive. What's amazing is because of that, when they talk about all the progressive people that were elected, he's not mentioned, which I think is a horrible mistake on the Republican Party because they're not identifying their true enemies. And this guy's going to be their enemy. But because he's pro-Israel, all of a sudden, nobody knows what to make of this man, right? And he says that I'm pro-Israel because I'm progressive. Because when I travel around the Middle East, there's only one progressive country in the Middle East, and that's Israel. So why would I be anti-Israel? And who exactly am I supporting? Turkey, Iran, they hang people like me. So this is, so he's very pro-Israel. So on the one hand, I'm bolstered by the fact that that the platform, they failed in their platform fight again. They failed getting their candidates anywhere. Bernie Sanders didn't come close again. He didn't choose, Vice President Biden didn't choose a progressive vice president. So all along the lines, all the metrics, they're going to be very loud. And they're going to be very, very in our face. They're very good at getting media attention. Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib, and there's a new woman in Imam in Colorado. So they're going to be in our face. They're going to be in our face, and they're going to make a lot of noise. But they're going to have very little influence, especially in the Biden administration. You'll see very soon they'll come out against the Biden administration. They'll say they're not doing enough, and they'll be some of their biggest critics. So I'm not so worried. At the same time, be cautious. Always make sure to call them out on who they are. I thought in the beginning that the best strategy would be to ignore them. I don't think that's true anymore.
Okay, great. Listen, we have 2 more questions for 2 more people. We have almost 2 minutes, so let's try to pack these in as quick as we can. This is from Aaron Soul. He says, do you feel Israel by now can become independent enough not to rely on what the U.S. says, or is it dependent on who the Israeli prime minister happens to be?
Well, I don't see the correlation. I mean, Israel's dependent on America for a very simple reason. Our fighter jets are American. I mean, it's just very simple. These things cost $250 million. They need about $100,000 in maintenance every time they go up into the air. We cannot develop our own fighter jet. We would need about $4 extra billion out of our budget, which we don't have, to develop a jet without producing a jet. It's just not going to happen. We fly F-35s, F-22s, F-16s, and some F-15s still, and those require serious. They require serious maintenance and parts, and we get those parts from America. So until we're ready to develop I don't know how we do it.
Okay, great. We have another question here. Last question for you is from Eric. He says, what do you anticipate will happen to Israel if Biden administration stops settlement building? What do you think Israel's response would be?
To not build settlements. I think that's going to be the number one thing. I think we'll try to get in a little here or there, try to sneak them in under the wire through technicalities. But I think it's going to be like for those of us that remember building under the Obama administration or lack of building, that's what's going to happen. We're not going to be able to fight that fight because we're going to need to save those fights for Iran. That's what Bibi Netanyahu did with Barack Obama. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Pilichowski. That was tremendous. I want to welcome Eli Fader, Rabbi Eli Fader, to be able to give a quick Dvar Torah. And he's here. I see you here. Okay, great. Let me put the spotlight on you 1 second. Thank you so much again.
Sure. Good evening, everybody, or good afternoon, wherever you happen to be. So when my good friend David asked me if I would give a talk, a little short Dvar Torah related to Aliyah and to the Parsha, to Eretz Yisrael, I was happy to be able to participate. Okay, and I'm very happy to be able to very supportive of David and Marcy's organization, and I'm good friends with Ariel also, with Aliyah Homes, and I'm very happy that you guys are really building up this initiative. So it's my honor to be able to speak to all of you. So in this week's parsha, it's actually an easy parsha. David asked me what could I say about Eretz Yisrael, and I know this is Parshas Chayei Sarah coming up, so that's it's an easy one. So we know in this week's parsha, we have the unfortunate passing of Sarah Imenu. And right away, Abraham is trying to find an appropriate burial place for his lost wife. And he tries to, he chooses out like this special plot of land, this Maras Machpelah, which he's gonna bury his wife, and he wants to buy it from Ephron. And Ephron, who's an honorable person, he says, look, I'll give it to you. It's yours for free. Don't worry about it. And Avram is very important. So, I want to buy it. I want to give good top dollar for it. It's very important to me that I'm going to buy it and with the best money. And then sure enough, as we know that that Ephron, not only he's considered a person who speaks a lot and does a little, because he said, I'll give it to you for free, but then sure enough, he took top dollar. And then the question is why was Avraham Avinu so concerned with getting this special burial place for Sarah Imenu? After all, the greatness of Sarah Imenu was in her life. Why is it important where she's buried and that there's this special Ma'aras HaMachpelah, this special field which we're going to bury her in? Why was that so important to him? And not only that, to specifically give top dollar in order to accomplish it. So I think we could we could learn an important lesson from the fact that this was very important for Avraham. And I think that the move which he did, which he made this a priority of his, is something which resonates with us, with every Jew, everyone who thinks about making Aliyah, every Jew who's in Eretz Yisrael to this day. And this to begin with, how does that come about? I think the Torah does tell us in the Torah itself, which is when the spies, the incident of the Meraglim in Parshat Shalach. So there were, as we all know, there were 12 spies who were sent to spy out the land, and 2 of them ended up being good, Yehoshua and Caleb. And Caleb, the Torah tells us that when they went to spy out the land, they went to Hebron. Okay, it mentioned that they went to Hebron. Vayavo al Hebron. And Rashi tells us that they didn't all go to Hebron. It really was just Caleb. He was the one who went to Hebron. Okay, he alone went to Hebron, and he went and he I guess meditated or specifically visited the graves of the Avos, the Kivrei Avos, which we, as we know, are in Hebron, so that he wouldn't be enticed, seduced by his friends, by the other 10 spies who were sinful, and to be in their advice. And sure enough, because of that, the pasuk says that Caleb was given the reward of being able to get Hebron. So you see that Caleb found himself in this predicament, that he knew he was going into a situation where he knew that there were 10 bad apples, so to speak, people who went on a bad path, and they were advising. There was a peer pressure, there was a value system. They were all in it together, trying to take down the mission, the plan of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and to undermine the land. And Caleb knew there was pressure. He sensed the pressure. And what did he do? He needed to know. He needed inspiration. So he went to the Kivrei Avos. He went to Hebron, and he thought into the lives of the Avos, and he identified with the Avos, and he took inspiration from the model and the lives which they led. Avram Avinu and Sarah were people who are loners. They went against the whole trend of the world, who are Odeh Avodah Zarah, because they recognized truth, and their commitment to truth was more important than their commitment to people. And that was what Caleb needed. He needed the courage and the strength to be able to go on his own, to be able to commit himself to that which he knew to be true despite the peer pressure. And I think that's what Avram Avinu knew when he was building a nation. He was involved in trying to build a nation. That was his goal. That was his dream, to be able to bring about a nation which is going to pass on for all the future generations and build up, passing on the message which he stood for. And he knew that people face pressures from their peers, from all different types of value systems, all different pressures and authorities, people who we respect, who have different values than ours. And it's important in times of difficulty to be able to identify with our avos and our imahos, and to be able to go to Eretz Yisrael as the land which Avram Avinu walked on, from the width and the length, and to be able to go to a place like Hebron, to Ma'aras HaMachpelah, to be able to identify with Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and Sarah, and Rivka, and Rachel, Sarah, and Leah, and to be able to think about their lives that they led. It allows us to be able to pull ourselves away from the peer pressures, from the other influences which we have on ourselves. And Avram Avinu knew he had to get a land, this special plot of land that was going to be his fair and square. No one was going to be able to argue with him and say, you stole it. And he knew he knew that Ephron was a tricky type of a guy, and he was trying to, he read Ephron properly, and he realized that if he doesn't pay top dollar in a public fashion, he knew that later on Ephron would be able to contend that, no, it really is mine. So Avram knew it had to be a clear-cut, absolute deal in a very special burial plot, which is a place that's going to be able to be passed down as a place for all generations, that all of us were always going to be able to go there to think about the lives of our great Avos and Imos. And sure enough, that burial place, which he purchased at that time, is still with us today. Of course, as we know, I've been there a few times. It's not that easy to go there. But the point is, even the fact that we have a country, we have the Eretz Yisrael, and we have control, we're able to go to that place, and we're able to, throughout the whole Eretz Yisrael, I'm sure every time whether you're in America or in Eretz Yisrael, when you go there, you can't help but feel we're in the land of our Avos and the land of our Imos. And in America, we have founding fathers, but our founding fathers, as great as they were, they're nothing like our Avos and our Imos. And the idea is that in a country like in America, or wherever we happen to live, we do face great influences from the culture which is around us. And that culture nowadays is a culture of great animosity and fighting and all types of conflicts. But whatever we happen to find ourselves, there's a lot of different influences which could impact us and shape us. And a person who lives in Eretz Yisrael, the founding fathers of Eretz Yisrael are the very Chumash which we find ourselves, and we could see the lives and we could hear the lives of all our Avos and Imos every week, and we could learn from them, we could take inspiration from them. And if we live in the land of the Avos and the Imos, that it sets like a tone for us of who are our models, where are we aspiring towards. And again, I want to just point out, it's not a panacea. It's not like you go to Eretz Yisrael and then everything's perfect. Of course, even if in Eretz Yisrael, there are competing values in everywhere that you are, whether you're in America or in Eretz Yisrael or anywhere. But at the same time, it helps ground us to be able to be in the land of the Avos and Imos. And that was the vision that Avraham Avinu had when he was persistent to be able to get a plot of land. That was his plan. And Baruch Hashem, we're able to continue his dream by being able to make Aliyah, visit Eretz Yisrael, think about the lives of Avos and Imos, and let them be the bedrock upon which we build our lives and our value systems. And therefore, I strongly support the Aliyah network and everything that you guys are doing and everyone who's a part of it, because I think it helps connect the Klal Yisrael back to our roots, to our Avos and Imos, who really set down the value system. We have to value Torah and HaKadosh Baruch Hu and truth above all else, above all other influences. And thank you for having me here today.
Thank you so much, Ali. Thank you so much for that.
Sure.
All right, guys, listen, we're on the hour. It seems like these events sort of continue on a little bit. We're very happy to chat. If you guys want to put on your